Okay, good evening, everyone. I'll tell you a little bit about us, or me in this case. My name is Kaylee. I'm a tax advisor with the TaxSavers. We're an advisory office located in Amstelveen, and we help individuals as well as sole proprietorships, so small companies, mastering their VAT and the income tax. Think about VAT returns, income tax returns, advice whatsoever. And tonight I'm going to tell you a bit about the VAT and income tax as a freelancer. If you have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat. At the end, there's some room to discuss those questions. So for now, let's start with the VAT or everything as a freelancer in general. What we're going to talk about today. So step one is, of course, always starting up your business. So we'll tell you a bit about the definition of a ZZP, a ZZPer, and tips on how to start. Secondly, I'm going to tell you a bit about the VAT. So what VAT is in general, how much the VAT in the Netherlands is, and how and when to handle the VAT in the Netherlands. And thirdly, we'll talk about income tax because that's also a very important factor as a freelancer. I'm going to tell you a bit about how to file the return, what you would need, and the benefits as a freelancer and any liabilities that follow from the tax return. And as I said, at the end, there will be a Q&A. So first, let's talk about starting up your business. So perhaps you've already started as a freelancer. Perhaps you're planning on becoming a freelancer. In any case, it's important to know what you're starting and how you're going to start. So tonight, I'll assume you know nothing at all. Perhaps you already have some basic understanding, but for this webinar, I'm going to assume that you know nothing at all. And as I said, if anything's unclear, feel free to drop it in the chat. But let's start. What is a freelancer? Because you might hear different terms regarding this, a freelancer, a ZZPer, a sole proprietorship, but what does everything even mean? So a freelancer or a ZZPer is if you're working, well, not in employment. So you're working for yourself, you have your own clients and customers without an employment contract on a regular or an incidental basis. And the client will not withhold any income tax, and any tax liabilities are your own responsibility. So what about a sole proprietorship or an eenmanszaak in Dutch? The sole proprietorship is a business entity. I see someone still has the same problem. We are recording and you should be able to see the screen in the recording, so that will be fine. But the sole proprietorship or the eenmanszaak is a legal form. A ZZP or a freelancer is not a legal form. That's more of a term to describe the work you're doing. But a sole proprietorship or an eenmanszaak is really a business entity, as well as a BV. That's a limited company. When you want to start as a freelancer or as a ZZPer, for the purpose of tonight, I'll just call it a freelancer. You have to decide, am I going to do this as a sole proprietor or in a BV? Both have different advantages and disadvantages, but for tonight, we'll only start about the sole proprietorship. The first problem or the first issue is, should I issue a registration with the Chamber of Commerce? Because it's not needed for a very incidental job or when it's an occasionally paid hobby. You have to determine, hey, is this something I make money with, or is it a hobby like for example, taking care of someone's garden from a family member, getting money for that? Or is it really a gardening job, for example, which you intend to make money with? So there are a few conditions to determine, hey, do I need a VAT number solely or a Chamber of Commerce number? So the first step is always to request a VAT number. Whether this is just a VAT number or a registration with the KVK, the Chamber of Commerce, and then acquiring a VAT number. If you're gonna start freelancing, you need a VAT number. Second, as I said, you have to register with the Chamber of Commerce if needed. If you do need to register with the Chamber of Commerce, this is always the first step, and you'll automatically receive a VAT number. The Chamber of Commerce is I think for most people always necessary, because if you want to send out an invoice, you need a Chamber of Commerce number. So for most people who start freelancing, they need to send out invoices, so they also need a Chamber of Commerce number. So if you offer products or services with the intention to make money, you're not doing it for a minimal price, but really, well, with the intention to make money, to do a business, then you need the KVK number. A few recommendations or tips from my side are based on mistakes that we see in real life. Get some help from the beginning if you don't know for sure what you're doing. It could be as easy as reaching out to a friend or a family member or a colleague who does know what they're doing, or a tax advisor, or even the Belastingdienst, the tax office. But when you start out, make sure you have the information to know what you're doing, to not make mistakes from the beginning. Um, so as I said, whether that's a family member, a friend, or a tax advisor or an accountant, make sure that you start off on the right foot. This avoids you from having to solve any problem, but it also might give you a good feeling on what you're doing, and some confidence. And the second tip, when starting up, keep track of your administration right away. And for some people, this might be basic knowledge. But when you're starting, or even before you started, any expenses you had to incur whatsoever, keep track of everything. And whether this is a paper folder or a folder on your laptop or a bookkeeping service, all completely fine. But keep track of everything right from the start, or even actually before you start, because any expenses you incurred before officially starting the business are all deductible later on. So when you start out, make sure you do it the right way, and to keep track of your administration from the beginning. If you think you can handle the administration yourself, that's completely fine. If you're not feeling so confident about that, make sure you get some help with this as well. Either a bookkeeping program or an accountant or a bookkeeper. Either way is completely fine. So the first thing I want to talk to you about today is the VAT. Some might be familiar with the concept of VAT, whether in the Netherlands or abroad. But again, as I said, I will assume you know nothing at all. So VAT is value added tax. Everyone pays this, whether you buy books or groceries or clothes whatsoever, everyone pays VAT. Well, almost everyone. And as an individual, there's nothing you can do with this tax, but as a business, you actually can. So what kind of VAT rates do we have? So we have the standard 21%. That's for most services and goods. If you're going to start freelancing, your income will probably also be subject to 21%. There are only a few categories who are exempt from this. We have the 9% category. That's for specific goods like books, medical services. Well, for now, still books, but they're going to change that. And we have the 0% VAT rate. Sorry, that's for medical, educational. So when you start your business, also try to find some time to find out, hey, which category of VAT rate am I subject to? The KVK or us, we can help you with this. There's a lot of information online, but it's in this case also important that you start out on the right foot. Then there's also a difference in VAT to the country you invoice. So if you invoice and provide services within the Netherlands, oh, that's this one, unless you provide a VAT exempt service, you always have to charge the 21 or 9% VAT, regardless of the client being an individual or a company. There's one step further is if you provide services to companies in the EU, so outside the Netherlands, but inside the EU. For any individuals outside the Netherlands, in the EU, you will just charge a regular VAT percentage based on what you also charge in the Netherlands. And if you invoice companies outside the Netherlands in the EU, it gets a little bit more difficult. Well, not difficult, but there are some additional steps you have to take into mind. You don't charge the regular VAT percentage when you invoice across the border, and in this case, in the EU. So let's say you invoice a company in Germany. Normally, in the Netherlands, the service is subject to 21%. You're not going to charge this 21% to Germany. Instead, what you're going to do, and as also shown on the PowerPoint, you're going to have to reverse charge the VAT. And what this does, instead of this company paying the Dutch VAT, you basically reverse the tax liability, the VAT liability, to the company in Germany. So they are responsible for paying the VAT in their own country. This is not everything. So besides the fact that you literally have to mention VAT or reverse charge VAT on the invoice, you're also going to have to file an ICP return. So that's for intra-community well, prestations or prestations. That is not a good translation. Sorry. The Dutch word is prestatie for intra-community services. um, so besides the VAT return, you file the ICP return in which you note the total amount of the invoice, the company or the other country of the company, and the VAT ID of the company. You don't owe any additional VAT when you file the ICP return. It's more of an informative VAT, informative return to notify the tax authorities in the other countries that that specific company has not paid any VAT on the invoice. This might sound pretty vague, and I think once you've done it once or twice, you'll understand exactly what it is. So it's more of an informative return in which you include this information. And what if you invoice or will provide services outside the EU? Outside the EU, it's always subject to 0% VAT. So you just include 0% VAT on the invoice. You don't have to pay any VAT to the Belastingdienst, and they are not responsible for paying VAT in the Netherlands. The only thing that might happen, and this depends on the country to which you send the invoices, you might become subject to VAT in the other country. So when you provide services to a country outside the EU, always do some research to find out if there's a VAT liability for you in the other country. Most often there are exemptions. For services of a certain amount or up to a certain amount, but try to find some information on the country in the well, the company, the country in which the other company is located, to make sure you're not well, missing any tax liabilities. And how do you handle such a VAT return? So once every quarter for most people, you have to file a VAT return. There's a difference between output VAT and input VAT. So output VAT is the VAT that you charge on an invoice to your customer. The VAT that you receive on this invoice is not your money to keep, and it's not taxed as income. You're basically acting as an in-between person between the customer or the client and the Belastingdienst, and it's your obligation to basically keep this VAT money for a while, and after the quarter ends, pay this to the tax office. Can you offset any other VAT against this? Yes, that's the input VAT. So on all business expenses that you pay Dutch VAT for, you can get this money refunded. So in the end, it's the output VAT, so basically the VAT on your income minus the input VAT, so the VAT on your business expenses, and that results in a certain net amount to pay or receive. If you only invoice companies outside the EU, there's no income or no output VAT in this case. You can still get the input VAT refunded. It's just important that this can only be the case when you pay Dutch VAT. If you pay VAT in another country, that's not handled in the usual VAT return. There are ways to get this refunded once a year. But for the sake of the webinar, I'll only talk about the Dutch VAT return. So every quarter, you're going to make this equation to see, hey, do I need to pay any VAT to the tax office, or are they going to refund me any VAT? And what does such a VAT return look like? This is a very basic layout, but the numbers and the letters correspond to the real-time VAT return. There are basically 5 categories. So we have 1 for supplies and services in this country, so in the Netherlands. 2, reverse charging mechanism in the Netherlands, so when the VAT has been reverse charged to you. We have 3, supplies and services to another country from the Netherlands, so from the Netherlands to another country, either outside the EU or inside the EU. And we have supply services from another country to the Netherlands. And the last step, 5, calculation of the VAT. That's the equation that we saw on the previous slide. So sales tax owed, that's the output VAT, minus the advance tax, that's the input VAT. And that results in either an amount to be paid or to be received. So what are the VAT return deadlines? There are 4 deadlines in a year. If you file a quarterly VAT return, there are a few exemptions, but for most people who are not VAT exempt, there are 4 deadlines in a year. So 4 quarters. The first quarter is April 30th. For the second quarter, it's July 31st. For the third quarter, it's October 31st, and for the fourth quarter, it's January 31st. So always a month after the quarter ends. There are exemptions when you file an annual VAT return or no VAT return at all, but this is not something you choose for. For 90% of the entrepreneurs, it's actually just per quarter. Um, One thing to go back to the previous slides, to give you a few examples. So if you're only working with companies within the Netherlands, then only Section 1 for the output VAT and Section 5 for the input VAT will be relevant. Do you send out invoices to companies outside the Netherlands but inside the EU? So the reverse charge mechanism we just saw. Then you'll also have to complete Section 3 along with the ICP return. And did you receive invoices from other companies in the EU? So the VAT has been reverse charged to you. Then Section 4 is important. Is the outcome negative? That means that you'll receive an amount of VAT from the tax office. Is the outcome positive? Then they expect you to pay a certain amount before these deadlines as well. So it's a deadline for submitting and paying any VAT. If the outcome is that you receive any VAT, that does happen a few weeks later. So this is only for submitting and paying the VAT that is due to the tax office. And then there are a few common questions. So questions I get a lot in my daily work. So do I need to file an ICP return? As previously mentioned, an ICP return is for if you send invoices to companies in the EU, and you have to reverse charge the VAT to them. So besides declaring this on the invoice, you also file the ICP return. I already told you a bit about that previously, but this is only when you invoice companies in other EU countries for which the invoice is subject to reverse charge VAT. And the second common question is, I forgot to file a VAT return, what now? Luckily, there's no need to worry because everything can be reversed. What's going to happen if you forget to file a VAT return before the deadline? Again, this is a very common thing. So if you forget it once or twice, that's a very normal thing. You'll probably get very scared when you receive one of those blue envelopes from the tax office because they're going to issue a fine with an unrealistically high amount of expected VAT. It's always around 5,000. For most sole proprietors, they do not reach those amounts of having to pay 5,000 euros in VAT, but they basically send this out to make sure that you get shocked, which probably happens, and you still file the VAT return. So what the fine will consist of is an expected or an estimated VAT amount by the tax office, a small fine for late filing, which is 68, and there will be a fine of 3% of the to be paid amount for late payments. If you say, well, this is my first quarter, I just forgot to file it, there was no income, no expenses whatsoever, you just still file the VAT return late, and you only pay the fine of 68 euros for late filing. The biggest part of the fine will be dropped if they process the actual information. So if you receive such a blue envelope that states you have to pay 5,000 or 6,000 for a VAT return that you did not submit, just make sure you file the VAT return as quickly as possible, and they will, in 99% of the cases, reverse the fine unless you are 2 years late, for example. That's a different case. But within a year, there's always almost a possibility to get this reversed. And the third thing is in one of my previous VAT returns, or I forgot to include something in a previous VAT return. Also, no need to worry because these types of mistakes can easily be reversed. And there are 2 options. Either you include the information in the next VAT return you have to file, or you just submit a VAT correction. If the total amount of the correction, so the VAT that you forgot to include, is less than 1,000, then you're allowed to include this in the next VAT return. Is it more than €1,000, then you have to file the VAT correction. That correction looks exactly the same like the normal VAT return, but it's a different form to notify the tax office that, hey, I did not file it correctly. Whether you did it on purpose or by accident, that's both possible, but there is an option to get it reversed or corrected. But just look at the total amount that the correction is due. More than 1,000 means a VAT correction. Less than 1,000 means you can include it in the next VAT return. And a few recommendations or tips for filing your VAT return or for handling the VAT. If you have difficulty splitting the income from the VAT amount, so the 100% from the 21%, for example, open one of those additional funds in your bank account, the savings. You can often open an additional savings account. If you receive income, you find it difficult to split this up, immediately pay this 21% or this 9% to this additional fund. So at the end of the quarter, you will still have enough of this money to pay the VAT return that is due. If you say, I can handle this by filing in Excel, also completely fine. But if you have difficulty or if you're just starting up, just open one of those additional funds / savings in your bank account to cover this mistake. And if you have trouble remembering these VAT deadlines, that's possible. Download the BTW Alert app, so the VAT Alert app from the Belastingdienst. They will send out a message when it's time to file the VAT return, so you won't forget to do it yourself, or hire a bookkeeper or a tax advisor to do this on your behalf and to remind you when it's time to do so. Everything can be reversed when you file late, but it's easier to prevent, of course, than to fix. And a small bit about the small business scheme. So the core. The core is a ruling to basically get a VAT exemption. So if you have the core, you have to request this and they need to approve it. It's only possible if your total income annually does not exceed €20,000. But when you do have the core ruling, then it means you don't have to charge VAT to your customers. But it also means that you're not allowed to deduct the VAT on your business expenses. They're changing the core ruling, so previously you had to benefit from the core for at least 3 years before you could cancel it. In this case, in the new situation from January 1st, 2025, you can benefit from it for less than 3 years. This also means that you don't have to file the quarterly VAT return. And I see a lot of questions popping in about the VAT or the core. We'll get to that in the end. If you do have the core, important that you don't charge VAT and you cannot get the VAT, the input VAT refunded. And another important thing is if the Belastingdienst owes you money, so when you're entitled to a refund, make sure that you declare your bank account number on Mijn Belastingdienst Zakelijk. That's the digital tax portal. If they don't have your bank account, they're not going to rush you to declare your bank account. So when you're entitled to a refund, or when you're starting out, just make sure that your bank account is known on Mijn Belastingdienst Zakelijk, because otherwise you can wait a long while for your refund if you're entitled to one. The second very important factor for a freelancer is income tax. So this works, well, kind of different than when you're employed. If you're employed, your employer will withhold a certain amount of income tax for you to make sure that you don't have to pay that, well, ginormous tax bill by yourself. As a freelancer, there's no one withholding the income tax for you, so this is something you have to do and pay yourself by filing an income tax return. It might sound scary when you're starting out, but you're already helping yourself a lot by preparing what's going to happen. So by preparing and knowing the tax percentages and the tax benefits, then you can already work your way up to the income tax return throughout the year and prevent yourself from surprises. So filing the annual income tax return, besides having to file the quarterly VAT return, you also have to file an annual income tax return. In this annual income tax return, you declare your total income and the business expenses on an annual basis to find out what your taxable profit is. And your taxable profit is nothing less than income minus expenses. Any VAT is not included in this income tax return. So that's all handled on a quarterly basis. The income tax return, the annual income tax return, really only looks at income, excluding VAT, and business expenses, excluding VAT. And the Belastingdienst will use the taxable profit to base the tax calculations on. So they don't look at the total income, but only on your taxable income or taxable profits. In the Netherlands, we have two tax percentages and two tax brackets. These change every year. So we're just going to talk about the 2024 ones. And so bracket 1 is for an income up to 75,624 euros. You have to pay a percentage of 36.97%. And for all income above 75,000, so not on everything, but only for the part that exceeds the first bracket, you have to pay 49.50%. Another main difference that you might find compared to filing a tax return as an employed person is the income-related healthcare insurance contribution. So this is also due when you're employed, but in that case, the assessment is always almost zero. If you're a freelancer or self-employed, you have to pay this as well. So on top of the income tax percentages we just saw, a second assessment will follow that will issue 5.35% of your taxable income. This is up to an income of 71,000. So if your income exceeds that, you don't have to pay this 5% on top of the 71,000. It's only for the income up to 71,000. Luckily, in the end, you won't be paying, or often you won't end up paying those flat percentages we saw in the brackets a second ago. There are two tax rebates, so tax discounts, you can consider them. We have the general levy rebate and the labor levy rebate. So if you work and live in the Netherlands, you are entitled to these rebates. Keep in mind, both of them have a different threshold. So the general levy rebate is a tax discount of 3,374 at maximum in 2024. So from an income of 24,814, it gradually becomes lower. So the higher your income, the lower the rebates, and you are entitled to this up to an income of 75,000. So at 75,000, this rebate will be totally zero. Then there is the labor levy rebate. Luckily, the threshold is a bit higher, so the maximum rebate for that is 5,532. So from an income of 39 or almost 40,000, this rebate becomes progressively lower, up to an income of 124. So at 40,000, it's the full rebate. At 125,000, it's actually zero. These are not rebates you have to calculate yourself. This is all calculated automatically in the income tax return. Just important for you to know that you won't end up paying those flat rates of 37%. There are rebates that even out a part of this percentage. But don't forget that you're also due this income-related healthcare insurance contribution. It's a mouthful, but this is also due on a monthly basis. And some might say, hey, why do I have to pay this income-related healthcare insurance contribution? I already pay my monthly premiums. The healthcare system consists of two elements, and that's the monthly premium you pay, which is just based on the insurance package that you choose. And there's a second component, which is income related. So in this case, also the higher your income, the higher the insurance contribution. That's a fixed percentage. You cannot do anything about that. And it does not matter if they don't look at your monthly premiums. But just keep in mind that this is a second assessment that will follow if you are self-employed. And a question I get a lot as well is, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur for the income tax? So if you register for a VAT ID, you become an entrepreneur for the VAT. This doesn't automatically mean that you're also an entrepreneur for the income tax, or yeah, they consider this an entrepreneur when you meet certain conditions. So there is an entrepreneur's check on the website of the Belastingdienst. So don't remember all these conditions. You can check out the ondernemers check, the entrepreneur's check on their website, but they're going to look at a few components. So the first one is investments, and this is in a specific order. So the first one is investments. Are you making investments, or are you investing time in money in starting a business? The second is continuity. Is this a one-time assignment, or is it a long-term assignment, or a few long-term assignments? Is it incidentally or occasionally? A very important one that's going to be very important in 2025 as well is the amount of clients. So do you just work for one client, or are there multiple clients? And why that matters is because they're going to look at false self-employment. Are you actually employed whilst being self-employed? And that's going to be a very important factor in 2025, because they're really going to look at all these types of situations to prevent people from benefiting from additional deductions while they're actually just falsely self-employed. This is also related to independence. So do you get to decide how and when you work, or do they say, well, we expect you to be at the office from 8 to 5, you use our computer, you use our materials, or are you free to decide how and when to work? Of course, this is within common sense, so that we know that they're not going to expect you to work at 2 o'clock at night. This is with a bit of common sense, but you still get to decide how and when to work. Liability. So are you personally liable for entrepreneurial risk? That's well, any responsibilities from not performing your work correctly. Are you personally liable for that? And I also mentioned entrepreneurial risk. So do you run risk by investing time, by investing money? Is there a chance that your clients do not pay their invoices? You really have to look at, is this my personal risk, or is this risk from someone else? And advertising. So do you advertise your business by a website, printouts, social media, whatsoever? But those are the conditions actually that they look at. I wanted to say a few, but these are all. It's really important on how you could explain that you either qualify for this or not. So it's not really black or white, a simple yes or no. You have to look at, hey, do I meet all these conditions? Is this really my business, or is it, for example, a side job? Why this matters: if you are an entrepreneur for the income tax, there are additional deductions you can use. The first one is the self. So let's say you meet those conditions and you qualify as an entrepreneur for the income tax. We start with the self-employment deduction. That's a fixed amount. I must say that in the coming years, they're gradually going to decrease, but in 2024, it's an additional deduction of 3,750 euros. What's important, besides the factors that we just discussed, is also that you had to work or have worked on the business for at least 1,225 hours in the year. That's around 24, 25 hours a week. And it's very important that you can show that you actually work those hours. So about by an hour registration, by showing your agenda. So if you meet the conditions and the hours, then you can apply the deduction of 3,750. So first, they look at your income minus the expenses, and then they apply the self-employment deduction or the self-employed deduction. Do you qualify for that? And are you within the first 5 years of your business? In 3 years of the first 5 years, you can also apply the starter's deduction. So that's another deduction of 2,123 euros. And you can only benefit from that if you qualify for the self-employment deduction or self-employed deduction. And there's a third one, which is not related to the hour criteria. So let's say you do meet the other conditions and you qualify as an entrepreneur, but you did not reach the 1,225 hours, then you can still make use of the SME profit exemption. So this profit exemption only gets applied after these previous deductions. So if you do not qualify for those, it's immediately after income minus expenses. If you do qualify for these deductions, they first deduct those, and then they deduct another 13.3% of the taxable profit. And so even if it's a side job and you do not qualify for the hours, if you qualify the other conditions, then there is still a benefit for you. And there's a small scale investment deduction. So if you invest in business materials, let's say a laptop, a phone, an iPad, anything you need to perform your business, often those are purchases of more than 450 euros. If you invest for more than 2,800 euros annually, you can get another deduction, which is up to 28% of the investment amount, which will also be deducted from your taxable profits. A few tips or recommendations for life. This correlates to the first tip I gave you for VAT. So if you receive income, put aside a certain percentage of the income you receive. Why this is important, sometimes people tend to forget that there is still an income tax return coming, and that they still have to pay a certain income tax liability. You could prevent this by either creating another fund or a savings, as we just saw with the VAT, but put aside a percentage of the income you receive. For everyone, it might differ how much that should be. I know that some people say, I'll just keep it in my mind, I will not put it aside. There are also a lot of people who say, well, I know I'm kind of messy. It would be great if I can put aside a certain part of that. What you could do, for example, at the beginning of the year, if you know or you have an expectation of this is what I might earn throughout the year, try to use one of the income tax calculator tools online. There are a lot of reliable ones to be found online. You can already get a feel of, wait, if I earn 80,000 euros this year, what should I pay in income tax? And every time you earn income, if a client pays your invoice, you can already put aside a certain part of this income for the income tax. It's better to have some additional money at the end of the year in the savings account than having to pay it from your own personal savings account because you didn't think of this when receiving the payment. This might also be common sense to a lot of people, but file your tax return on time to prevent tax interest. So the general deadline, the deadline for preventing tax interest is the 1st of May. So you can get an extension for filing the tax return, but all the tax returns filed after May 1st are subject to tax interest. If you do not file on time, even if it's the 2nd of May, as a freelancer or self-employed, you'll definitely have to pay some income tax. So it's better to prevent this tax interest by filing it on time than filing after the deadline and having to pay additional tax as well. For 2023, the tax interest was 7.5% on annual basis. So if you owe a certain amount, this could really be a lot. So prevent this or try to prevent it by getting help or starting on time. But that would it can really be a lot annually. If you cannot file it on time or you already get a feeling in January like, hey, this is not going to work, there are some things going on, I cannot file it on time, file a provisional tax return. A provisional tax return is basically an estimation of your tax situation in a certain year, but this will also generate an assessment and you can already pay your income tax before the deadline. And later, by filing the income tax return, you actually include the actual information. If you pay too much through the provisional tax return, you can still get it refunded, or you have to pay some additional money when receiving the assessment. This provisional tax return can also happen on a monthly basis. So you can also get the provisional tax return filed. Well, you do it once, but they use it every month. And you can already split out your tax liability over multiple months to prevent you having to pay a certain amount at once in June or July. And it's important that you don't throw away your administration after filing the income tax return. Officially, you have an obligation to save or keep your administration for at least 7 years. Sometimes it happens that the Belastingdienst checks something retroactively and they say, well, we would like you to show these expenses, for example, and you should be able to show them the invoices for your expenses. So throughout the year, keep all the invoices and the receipts, either digitally or physically, and make sure that you keep this administration for a long while. If not, if you cannot show, for example, a few expenses, then they're going to say, okay, you simply cannot deduct this expense. So keep the administration for a certain while, to prevent any disadvantages later on. It's fine if you have those digitally. It doesn't need to be physically, but make sure that you have the proof of a certain expense, but also your income. Um, those are actually the main tips I have. There could be a lot more, but then I might spill or spoil our job a little bit. So I'm not going to tell you all the details, but these are really the main ones if you choose to file the tax return yourself. And now there is some room for questions. So you already sent a lot of questions in the chat. If you prefer not to send your question in the chat, or we forgot, or you didn't get to ask it, you can scan the QR code and it leads to the contact form on our website, or you can send an email to info@taxsavers. Either way is completely fine, but we're going to tackle a few questions right now, because perhaps people have the same question. Someone says, I'm setting up a photography business. I will make an investment in equipment before I establish recurring income, probably 3 or 4 months. How does the KVK or the Belastingdienst see this? So you're allowed to have expenses before actually earning any income. For example, camera, if those are really expenses you need for starting your business, then you can still deduct them. Just keep in mind, if over multiple years you only declare expenses and no income whatsoever, then they're going to ask, are you sure that this is really a business expense, or you really needed the expense to start your business? So if it's a one-time thing, a one-time loss, then you can declare the loss. However, I would be really careful with this, because if you only declare a loss, they're definitely going to check whether that's really a business expense. So you can still deduct the VAT, you can still include the expense in the income tax return, but especially when you're starting out in your first year, be careful that it's not a ginormous expense, because they're definitely going to ask questions on that. Another question is, how can I register the working hours to benefit on tax reduction? So one way to keep track of your hours is an Excel file. You don't have to time it on the minute, but as detailed as possible. So, for example, on the 23rd of October, I spent 1 hour on researching or administration or marketing. It's just important that if they check your hours, you need to be able to present them with an overview and within a reasonable amount of time. So that's often 2 weeks. There are also bookkeeping programs who allow you to time this just on their website. You can also do it in your agenda, so writing it down. I would not recommend this, however, because it's going to be very difficult to show it to the Belastingdienst if you have to scan everything. But just a general overview in Excel or a bookkeeping program is okay. Someone asked, if my business is just a side job, so let's say less than €1,000 a year, must I still pay income tax on my earnings? In principle, yes. And it of course depends if you earn this income besides your employment income, or if it's just this income. Let's say if it's just €1,000 a year, then due to the rebates, the tax rebates, your tax liability is probably going to end up being zero besides the healthcare insurance premium. The general rule is if you owe less than €52 of tax to the tax office, you do not have to file a tax return. Well, how do you know what the tax assessment would result in? That's by just starting it up, preparing it, and seeing what the result is. So whether you have to pay income tax on this completely depends on the rest of your situation, and it might be a bit too specific to tell you yes or no. But your side income just gets added on top of the other income you have. So whether that's employment income, a pension, any other benefit or allowance, the side income will be added to the rest of your income and just be taxed the same way. So there's no generic answer for this because it depends on the rest of your situation. Um, Someone asked to recommend a reliable income tax calculator. The one I always use is the one from the Chamber of Commerce. They provide one in which you can also select whether you benefit or you may benefit from the additional deductions. So the Chamber of Commerce has one also in English, which I prefer to use. How do I handle VAT if I provide a service to an organization within the EU that it's exempt from VAT? So, for example, a non-profit organization. There is a variety of answers to this one, also from the tax office. I just recently checked this because, well, there were a lot of questions about this. Um, if you invoice an organization which is VAT exempt in the EU, then on the invoice you still include reverse charge VAT because you reverse charge the VAT to them. It does not mean that they have to pay VAT in their own country. It just means that you reverse the VAT obligation to the other company. You should still include it in the ICP return. So even though they are VAT exempt, you still include it or treat it as a company which would not be VAT exempt. Another question, is it possible to get VAT money back for goods or services that are not for business use? Um, I assume you might be asking if you can get the VAT refunded for personal purchases. No. Business, the VAT return only qualifies for VAT on business expenses, or really purchase you had to make for your business. Someone says, I have submitted the physical VAT form. Oh, I have submitted the physical VAT form for Q3 via post about a week ago. I owe them €5 and haven't heard back on how to pay it yet. Do I just wait, or is there a way to contact the Belastingdienst if it gets any closer to the deadline? Check on Mijn Belastingdienst Zakelijk. You can see the overview of all the VAT return quarters. There is a payment reference on this on the page. So the total amount which you saw in the VAT return combined with the payment reference allow you the information to pay this. If you're not sure whether they received it correctly, you can also reach out to them via phone to check in, hey, did everything go the right way? But on Mijn Belastingdienst Zakelijk, there is an option to show or to view your personal payment reference. If you use that payment reference in combination with the bank account number from the tax office and the total amount, if you pay that before the deadline, they receive the payment, that's fine. So either check in with the tax office or check the payment reference on Mijn Belastingdienst Zakelijk and use the payment reference to transfer the money yourself. Someone says if you have the core, so the small business scheme, are you eligible for the rebates? Yeah, so the rebates we discussed, and I assume you're talking about the general rebate and the tax rebate. So let me go back to the question. I think you meant these, so the general levy rebate and the labor levy rebate. Everyone is entitled to those. So whether you have the core, whether you're employed, self-employed, whether you receive a pension, any other benefits, you are allowed to these rebates. So with or without the core, you can benefit from these rebates. So yeah, definitely. Another important question is, I heard that from January 2025, the government wants to bring tighter rules for freelancers working for companies, especially when self-employed people only have one customer. Do you maybe have some more information on that? Yeah, this is going to be a major change from 2025, which is really important if you permanently work for one customer. So, um, let's say you have a very long-term assignment, indefinite with a customer, you work in their office. Basically, you meet all the conditions or tick all the boxes to be employed. But you're self-employed, so you're sending them invoices. You benefit from these employment deductions. What's going to happen in 2025? They're going to start investigating this. So they're going to look at everyone's situation and see, hey, do you benefit from these entrepreneurs deductions while you're actually employed? Any more information, you really have to check at the condition of multiple clients and independent. So it could be that you will have one long-term assignment. So let's say a year for one customer. That's an option because some projects are just a long term. So it's not definitely a problem if you work for one client, but it depends on the duration and the other conditions. So try to see if there's a relationship of authority between you and the customer. So do they pay you when you're sick or on leave? Could you theoretically send out a replacement to do your work, or is it really related to you personally? Um, and again, do you get to decide how and when you work? So if there's no relationship of authority, it's just one long-term assignment, then it's not definitely going to be a problem. If this is a permanent or however long permanent situation, then this might really be a problem. And it's important that you start researching your position in this. So try to see, would I qualify as an employee instead of self-employed for this business? And try to handle right now already. Because in the next year, they are only gonna send out fines if you don't show that you're improving this. And they're gonna fine the customers, the clients, but still for you personally, it's very important that you start researching your own position. And you could already improve your position by taking on more clients, or marketing or advertising yourself. So there's no immediate problem, but try to already research your situation to see, hey, would this cause a problem for me in a year or so? Um, Someone asks, I work part-time. Let's see, this is the last question we're gonna discuss right now. If I didn't get to answer your question, send an email or scan the QR code. Um, Do I still need to file VAT taxes or VAT returns every quarter if I don't have income from that period? Yes. So even if there's no income, no expenses, no activity whatsoever, if you have a VAT number, always file the VAT return unless you are deregistered. So always file the VAT return. Um, as I said, ask your question through the contact form or send us an email. How can we help you in the future? So if you're planning on leaving, stick around for one more minute. A bit on our services. We offer tax packages for continuous help throughout the year that entails quarterly VAT returns and income tax return. But we also offer help on consultation basis. So if you have a specific situation, specific question, you need advice, also reach out to us to see how we can help you. And what's next? So if you thought, well, this is really helpful, this was really interesting, there's more coming up for you. On the 9th of November, we have a stand at the IM Expat Fair in The Hague, which also entails a tax advantages workshop for first home buyers. But we will be there to ask questions, to look around. And on the 20th of November, our partner will have a webinar on mortgages in the Netherlands. So what to expect in 2025 and how to acquire a mortgage as a starter, as an expat. You can also find us on social media, so Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and on our website. On either of those platforms, we share news updates, so any important changes, but you can also reach out to us via one of those platforms to your preparation. Um, I hope I was able to help you out with the questions. I will go back to this slide. Let us know if there's anything else we can help you with, because we would be more than willing to help you out. For now, have a very good night, and perhaps we'll speak to you soon.